Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I am your host, Chris Noble. And today we've got a really interesting topic. We're going to be looking at the origins of the human species, but more specifically from the perspective of a galactic perspective. And how can we do that? Well, we can have some really fascinating guests onto our show to talk about these things from an insider perspective. So today, I wanted to talk and bring in an insider to speak more on this galactic perspective of human history. So, for today's episode, I've got an amazing guest, Tim Tactics, and Tim is a tactical advisor and an analyst from the covert space and sort of sector. This, I forget the space program, but basically a covert sector of the German government, working to understand the missions and strategies of extraterrestrials on our planet and in the solar system and beyond, which we're going to get into in a moment. I'm going to ask Tim a bit more specifically about what this actually means. But if you want to get more insight on Tim and some of his incredible information that we'll just be tapping a little bit into today, he's featured on Gaia Television's Cosmic Disclosure, and I highly recommend checking this out if you enjoy our conversation today. But a bit more on Tim. So he has insider knowledge that spans well over a decade, having worked with many projects and undisclosed projects. So his insider knowledge spans over not only a decade, but also other topics like the mysteries of the universe and many things that we're going to get into today. So his insights are informed by an extensive network of interconnections with over 10 extraterrestrial species, which is absolutely incredible, and actually over 100 meetings with the gray species in particular. So we're going to get Tim's incredible perspective on our human history today in this really fascinating episode. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show, Tim. How are you doing today, Tim?
Chris, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to go in some ancient wisdom and some 2,000 to 20,000 years of evolution within 2 hours.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So obviously we'll be doing some high level views on some of these topics today. However, I'm so excited to get into this. But before we do, Tim, I would love to just for the audience, give them a bit of perspective on, where are you coming from today with this knowledge, this amazing knowledge? Because for those of you watching and listening, when an insider can come out and whistleblow and speak to these areas of reality that most of the public have no idea, no access to, we're going to be listening and hearing perhaps some pretty groundbreaking information you may have never heard before. So, Tim, how did you come into this knowledge that we're going to be sharing today?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not a whistleblower because that's a legal term for someone who's accusing especially the government and other groups of their wrongdoing.
Good point.
Which I'm not. I just want to make that very, very clear. I'm not pointing my finger at anyone. I am an insider, right? I am an insider though, which means I used to work 10 years in the governance or the covert governance in the regular governance sector and the covert governance sector in Europe. Which, as you pointed out, is aiming at understanding what the whole situation, exopolitics, ETs, and other life forms in the universe is about. And that's actually fascinating because still we do have some countries, even though we are now in a phase of disclosure, everyone is noticing that we have so much interesting stuff that is coming on Normstream television. People talking about ETs in congressional hearings. We do have the discoveries of the pyramids that we have basically these coils underneath the pyramids. We have encounters more than ever. People uploading their ET stuff every day on TikTok and Instagram. It's ballooning up, and everyone can see that. Everyone feels that something is happening on the planet, and that has to do with the change in policies as well. We're coming from a history where ET contacts and spirituality in general was seen as dangerous when it's in the hands of the global population, and also was ridiculed for quite some time for the reason traditionally, in order to figure out what the whole subject is about, we're talking about World War II, where a lot of the sightings in the Western culture have basically begun. Then we have Roswell, which was a big milestone, 1947. 2 weeks later, the president signed basically an act to establish the CIA, which was pulled up from the ground in 2 weeks, which is incredible. That shows how relevant that topic was at that time. Yeah, we came quite a long way, and 80 years later, me studying and being 18 and being offered a job in the field of well, first of all, it was like political analysis and certain projects, and then later on going into governance, and then it took 4 years until I was even close to realizing, well, what rabbit hole I actually got into. And things are changing. We do see that, the United States now has the Space Force. Any big country has a Space Force too, and not so popular, not so in the, face of everyone, but Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, China, they all established their own versions of Space Force. And that makes the recruitment process a lot easier, and we will going into a time where people will be doing interviews and recruitment centers of going into exopolitics and going into the stars in a certain way. That's a fascinating time, I guess.
Oh yeah, it's a absolutely exciting time to be alive. I know that much on this planet. There's just so much happening that we're aware of and obviously not at all aware of. And before we get into again some of these perspectives on where does it all come from? Where are we coming from as a species in this galactic family and community? Before we get into that, could you share with us maybe just one of the interactions you have had with an extraterrestrial species to give our audience a flavor of the types of interactions you have had?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, the recruitment process. So no one back, in those in that phase, and still, no one would be interviewed, and you wouldn't find like an open vacancy for like ET extraterrestrials, exopolitics, or something like that. So it used to be a process of being recruited that was fairly odd. I gotta say, fairly intransparent, and it took quite some years just in order to get the background checks and the emotional capacities and so many other factors just in place. And yeah, that led me quite far down the rabbit hole in a certain way. And some of the interactions, basically, they're called transmissions. So anything that certain groups on this planet catch from whatever source, that's all been collected, analyzed, and scanned for potential benefit and harm. So both sides are being reflected, and that can be anything. So it can be as mundane as like a sound file that comes from space, and it's just where people not typically me. I was more in like the communication governance sector, but there are analysts out there who look at these transmissions, and they look at these things and see if a tone is actually a reflection of the space or certain other physical phenomena, is there intelligence behind that has, because the range and the variance, the variety of different forms of communication in the universe is spectacular, far beyond what humans would naturally think is communication can still be communication. But we also do have video material that was analyzed. I've seen that in rare times, a few times. I've seen video material where it was like pulled as like an outside insider for a certain project. And there are other people working on other stuff too. I was especially recruited and thrown into the cold water of so-called exotic species, which are basically anything that is that doesn't look like a human, and that doesn't walk like a human, and that might be a little further out there than the typical form of ETs. Because the interesting thing is we have basically two categories of non-terrestrial life forms, and one of them is the horizontal line, which is basically anything that falls under the same type of category of life that we have on planet Earth. So anything that looks distantly like a human, anything that breathes the same air, and has mostly the same type of capabilities than humans have, plus minus a couple million years, I would say. That's the horizontal line, and then you have a vertical line, and then that is where it gets really exotic, because then we are talking about life forms that are not only sharing the same space and the same time and the same location that we do, but they have like stacked up frequential realms, other dimensions, very exotic types of realms and realities. And not to spoil this version of the universe that we are living in is not the only one. There are quite a number of other versions of the universe where life is very different compared to what we see here. And that was basically my expertise. And for that, we delved into the grays, which it's not their original name. That is something that humans have given them in order, in order to describe them due to their gray-skinned nature. One of the most invasive species, or let's say one of the most popular and most widespread species too, because they appear everywhere in pop music and pop culture and so on. So there was quite a large interest in figuring out what their interest was. And the second species, or the second life form actually that we were looking into, is a project that had a long tradition in Central Europe, dating back to the 1940s. Where basically the Germans at that time and certain other nations were quite newly tapping into quantum physics and the realization that there might be life behind the veil of reality, the veil of what we can perceive. So the idea in the 1940s was there might be a life form outside of the visible spectrum and perceivable, the event horizon, if you want to call it that way. So there might be something behind that, a designer, a God, if you want to call it that way. And in the 1940s, one of those projects, archaic projects at that time, was trying to get into contact with that life form, mostly for geopolitical reasons, which is laughable if you think about that from the perspective of a cosmic life form.
It's absolutely mind blowing to hear, from yourself and other insiders to speak on these things where you're mentioning dates back in the 1940s or maybe sometimes earlier than that of, our governments and other governments contacting these species or having, these pretty incredible stories of just interactions. And of course, we're now recording this in 2025, and that still would be a very incredible situation to behold even today, because it's still been obviously undercover and not being brought to the public's knowledge. So I know Dr. Stephen Greer did a great documentary years ago called The Lost Century, because we really have lost over 100 years of potential public development with these species, because the knowledge and the information alone that we get from these other species is, well, it blows my mind, which is why I absolutely love this topic. So with that in mind, I would love, Tim, to get your perspective on who are we as a species? Let's maybe dive into where do we come from? We have this typical, let's say, the mainstream perspective, right, where we've been around in this physical form as a human being for, I don't know, 250,000 years. And then roughly just 6,000, 8,000 years ago, all of a sudden, we have civilization, Mesopotamia, Sumeria, evolves into things like Egypt and Greece, and then we have about this 4 to 6,000 year period of somewhat pretty rich history, but still some pretty big gaps. And then here we are today, and I've always found that story a little peculiar, to say the very least. But from your perspective as an insider, what have you learned through all these videos you've seen, through all this audio, and of course, all the documentation you've read through? What has been your perspective on our origins as the human race?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Chris. Yeah, well, I mean, we're tapping into one of the most fundamental questions of the universe. Who are we?
Yeah.
That is already one of the reasons why we're even in existence. Out of the potential. I think one of the most interesting things to me to learn was that even the very, very far developed and very carefully collecting information, information-wise, very carefully collecting species out there do not agree upon the same history of Earth. That is very, very right. I found that super interesting because the first thing, the way that history is explained to humans, and back then, I was, formally trained, so my perspective of history was linearly, unfolding in a certain way. So the idea of a human would be something has to come before something, and it starts somewhere. But that is not quite the reality that the universe is far more complex and exotic and maybe weird, if we want to use that word, than just the linear perspective. And to me, it was fascinating to see that there were different species, because the first reaction is, are they lying to us? Is that are they hiding? Why are there two witnesses who are actually talking about the same time, but they have completely different versions of what happened? And that can only be explained and understood when we realize that the perspective of the observer is determining what we are actually looking at in the quantum universe. That's all that it is, right? So the idea is there are multiple observers, multiple ETs looking at Earth, but they are looking from different perspectives, from their own timelines, from their own position in time space. And that can change radically what they're actually looking at. And then the universe comes in, and it has a fantastic, almost like a nonchalant type of melting everything together into one hot pot of history, which then also includes certain glitches in the matrix, basically. Like the infamous Mandela effect, and people that remember the loom and fruit of the loom, and certain all these things that you can find everywhere on the. I personally, I had that one moment. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but there was one commercial of a baseball player who's basically catching a ball in front of a journalist, and I think it was a Pepsi, one of these thingy beverage commercials or so. The interesting thing is that I was clearly remembering a blonde person who was doing the interview. And even AI does. So I asked ChatGPT about it, and ChatGPT was saying it's a blonde woman, and her name is, and she's journalist from, and so on. Interestingly enough, if you now look at YouTube, you only find a dark-skinned Afro-American woman who's doing the interview. So wow. Even these things change. I think it's.
I was just going to say for our audience, that this Mandela effect is one of the best examples we have of of a multiverse and of timelines coming together, branching off, coming back together again. Pop culture. I love the Marvel universe, like Marvel movies and things like that, because I do feel like they can give at least a visual representation of the multiverse, which come out in a lot of the Marvel movies, like Doctor Strange and things like that. And I do find that they at least can hit on some of the reality in which, yeah, this is a very complex universe. And when you mentioned that, of course, like we have these different extraterrestrial species observing us in our history. Well, that makes sense that it would actually be a different history from the different extraterrestrials' perspective, because if it's a quantum reality, everything is essentially created based on the perspective of the observer. So I actually just had to take a moment there to really realize that there isn't a fully true, quote unquote, true version of history, is there then, Tim, right? Like there can't be. There can be maybe fragments. Like what do we look like? How can we come to some idea of what our past is then?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. First of all, it's something that I found, because you're mentioning the Marvel movie, and I think we got to mention that it's fascinating. There's this one scene where in the Marvel movies, the Cuba crisis is happening, and the nuclear U-boats or submarines are just heading towards each other, and it's based upon a real story. So for everyone who might be not familiar with the Cuba crisis, basically the U.S. station nuclear weapons in Turkey. The Russians tried to bring over, nuclear bombs to Cuba, which is not far away from Florida, as we know. And Kennedy was pulling up all these ships. And the interesting thing, which I guess a lot of people do not know, is that Russia has given the command to attack, which would have led to, nuclear extinction. Interestingly enough, what we learned in the project was when we talked about timelines, and we asked them, have you tingled and intermingled with our timelines? And they were saying yes. That was, for example, the planet and the civilization came mostly to an end in the Cuba crisis, because the way that it would have unfolded is the Russians got the command. This guy is firing the atomic bombs over. The other side does the same, and so on. And basically, millions and millions of people would have not finished the cycle that they actually came to this planet to experience. That was their answer. That was the answer of ET species, and they said we couldn't let that happen. So we basically pulled that back to the moment where that guy got the command. And interestingly enough, in the real history, which is absolutely unprecedented, because soldiers are basically trained to follow commands. In the real history, this, I think it was lieutenant or something, like anyone on the Russian side was ignoring the Kremlin, was ignoring the command of attacking, and basically saved humanity. In the Marvel universe, it was Professor X who was actually right.
Actually, I just watched that like literally a couple of weeks ago. That one in particular, and they had the X-Men had this intervention, and whenever I watch these superhero movies, I always think of it as an archetype of what we have potential to become ourselves as a human species, because we're like barely tapped into our potential, like a couple of percent at best, I would say. But also it's depicting, I'm sure, extraterrestrials that have come to this planet have lent their superpowers, so to speak, and have likely intervened. We know that this happens at nuclear test sites all over the planet where they're turning off bombs all the time. And I wonder how many times in history have extraterrestrials intervened to prevent a total disaster.
Yeah, probably not as much as we might think, but they usually, but they are certain. It's what's kind of interesting is that there are certain unwritten rules to when a species can actually intermingle and interfere with temporal dynamics, timelines, and internal processes as well. Because you mentioned the nuclear bombs. What we do know is we have, people might think we only had three nuclear bombs on the planet that were detonated. One in New Mexico, one in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. In reality, is we have thousands, 4,000 or so nuclear bombs that were detonated on this planet in order to just test things, and that's something that is a fact, but people usually are not aware of that. However, and it was tried, all these things happened and no one intervened, but what we notice is in the very moment when people try to shoot one of these nuclear bombs towards the moon, the situation would be always the same. UFO flies in, shoots a laser beam, shoots another laser beam, and the nuclear warhead would completely be out of operation. And then the thing would just fly away. So the idea of ETs, basically intermingling and interfering all the time, that's not the case. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening on planet Earth, and no one so far stepped in. But there's a certain border where certain ETs then say, not further than this. So there's not a single nuclear bomb that has ever been detonated outside of the ionosphere of the planet, and the same thing applies to if the species would do something that destroys the planet and destroys certain dynamics in the universe in the way that they are planned, then certain ETs would come in and change certain variables. Yeah.
So then this makes me think, Tim, of these gods that have come in throughout history, gods with a small g, not the creator of the entire universe, but these gods that have come to many of these ancient civilizations. And we see in a lot of them a pantheon, almost a family of gods that seem to be very similar when you cross-reference them from different cultures, which I have done many times. And I've always wondered, well, I'm sure it's probably a combination of different species, but from your perspective, who were these gods? And maybe we can get more specific, like with the famous ones like the Anunnaki, perhaps that could have been this family that likely did have some serious influence with humans more than I'm sure a lot of other species have. So what's your perspective on that?
I gotta say that because I oftentimes get the question about the Anunnaki, and I've never in any governance file or anywhere have ever heard about them, which is very interesting. So I first heard about them when I actually came forward and was talking to other people, but that doesn't mean that they do not exist or something. It might
Just
be
different
a
name.
bit of a different name. That's something that I've often encountered, that people were talking about certain, best practice or best example is the Grays. That's not their real name, but people, see gray-skinned being and then think it's gray. Interesting enough, there are multiple life forms and species out there who have gray-skinned bodies. And oftentimes humans are like, everything that's gray is like kind of, it's all the same in a way. But ultimately, yeah, it's a combination of non-terrestrial horizontal life forms. And then you have certain archetypes, certain cosmic influences that just pair into that. Same story with if you go into certain prophets and so on, you find certain archetypes that are being pulled through history, while at the same time we do have a historical person where we might even have documentation about them and clear evidence that they existed. So it is like, as always in history, when things over hundreds and thousands of years, I don't know if you in the US have the same game where people just whisper something into the ear and then
Broken telephone, right?
Broken telephone, they call
Yeah.
it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
In Europe, they call that the silent post office.
That's more poetic. I like yours. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But anyway, but it's you see what's happening. Basically, at the end, often even if it's just 5 kids that are doing that, at the end it's oftentimes completely twisted. And now take that into perspective of like 2,000 years of time. what's happening with the universe is, and I find that very interesting, there are these cycles. The universe has certain periodic phases where it's doing certain things, almost like seasons, but not only like the seasons that we do have, summertime, wintertime on planet Earth, but there are cosmic seasons, and there are also, certain dynamics of the universe where it's just a pulling outwards situation and then it's bringing it together again. And that is basically something that we're observing with the history of planet Earth. We cannot talk literally, and advanced projects figured that out. We cannot look further into the universe and into timelines than about 12,500 to maximum 20,000 years. Because everything that is behind that is getting messy, because then you have too many observers that are having different versions, and what the universe is just doing, which is such a fantastic, but also lazy, but also super charming move, I guess. It's just taking everything that it's collected and just pressing it all together into one timeline and thinking like, no one's gonna notice, what's gonna happen. And it's a fantastic thing, but it's something that, in my opinion, and a lot of the observation and so on, the observation shows that evidently. I think humanity has to say goodbye about the idea that we can go infinitively far back into history and that everything logistically and linearly makes sense. I think that's not happening, because the universe acts almost like a computer system in certain way. Not saying that it is only a computer system, it is partially a computer system. If you talk to some of the advanced, officers that are into AI and advanced AI in these programs, they will tell you it's 100% computer system. They are 100% living that reality. But it's not. It's partially a computer. It's partially organic and so much more. But computer systems have like this feature of efficiency. So it's trying to make the processes very efficient and so on. So the universe is known for not displaying information when they're not observed, which saves a lot of energy in a certain way. And in the same way, the universe has a certain stretch until the memory is basically full. And what the universe then is doing, it's kind of like flushing it down the toilet, to be very clear about that.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry,
No,
yes.
go ahead, Tim. Please go ahead.
And then keeping basically the learnings of what's relevant for the soul mission and the development of the universe as like an intelligent, complex and improving complex.
Well, it makes me think of, I don't know 100% on the mathematics of this, but I heard something to the effect that, my cousin works in the video game world, and I love video games. And I was learning more about the mathematics of how they create their landscapes and their environments in a video game. And basically, depending on where your character looks, is where the level materializes in front of you. The environment materializes. However, when that character isn't looking in that direction anymore, that environment doesn't exist. It's gone. It's not like it's there forever, and then when you turn, it's there. You turn away, it's there. It's not. It's gone, so that it saves on RAM, so that it saves on memory and processing power and all that, which is obviously exactly what you're talking to when we liken this universe to a form of a holographic digital reality, but it's not fully that, which kind of makes sense. Like, we live in a digital and an organic world. Why would the universe be any different, right? So is something like that. I think when people we're starting to think about history, this is fantastic, because I think we need to start thinking more multidimensionally, which is also something we got to start thinking about more when it comes to disclosure and extraterrestrials, and pretty much just evolving right now as a species, because this is a multidimensional reality. We can't look at history as linearly as we might want to. So it's great because we can basically take my show that looks at our history and go, hey, we're not even really sure if we can get a full answer on any of this, because it's all perspective and these are multidimensional realities. So, like you said, this window of like at most 20,000 years is really all we have of something concrete. With that in mind, we have physical locations still on this planet that are in a state of ruin that can give us some evidence. Of course, for this is where we get archaeology and studies like this. I go to sacred sites all the time, and I've had amazing experiences at many of them. And I take groups at least once a year now, because of just there's such magical and important experiences I think we all need to have. From your perspective, what existing sites that are still on this planet might be good examples to our audience as like some of the most ancient technology, ancient remnants of a long lost civilization?
Oh, fascinating question. I mean, we do have that all over the planet, which is something normstream civilization has to integrate. And I think the step of like releasing the footage and the data of the Giza pyramids, actually having miles and kilometers of coils and a very sophisticated network of geometry underneath the plateau. That is groundbreaking. That is groundbreaking. I think a lot of people, do not, let's see that maybe on TikTok or so. I think they find that interesting, but might not know the real implications of what that means and how earth shaking that actually is for the norm stream. And luckily we are in a time where humanity per se is realizing and learning that a lot of the stuff needs to be corrected. Not all of the stuff will be corrected, I guess, but at least making things operational again, and realizing that certain things are just different, and it's not a tomb, as it's not people with little stones that were building the Giza pyramids or something. It's just not. That's just not there. It's a very sophisticated architecture and a machine in many with serve so many different functions. From transmitting energies, from tapping into the charged ionosphere and into charged particles, and so many different things. The Giza pyramid is by far probably the most complex and complicated structure that we have on the planet right now. And the fascinating thing, and here we're tapping again into getting rid of some of the linearity and shaking some of our reality. But when we were asking one of the species about what is with the pyramids, who built them actually, their answer was quite fascinating, because they said no one actually built the pyramids. They are coming from a version of the universe. So the planet is recycled and recycled in cycles, recycled, used multiple times, basically, with different beings on the planet, and always representing the consciousness of the cosmic from that given perspective, localized space-time. So when we go back multiple iterations of this planet, we do not have little people running around on the planet. We have a much more broader understanding of what consciousness is, in the way that consciousness just does things, in a very cosmic, intelligent way. If you look into the design of a human body, of a body per se, it's genius. There's intricate, intelligent behind that, and we do see that in the pyramid as well. So their answer was very, very mind challenging, I guess, because they were saying no one built these pyramids. They were part of one of the very first iterations of the planet, where we basically put it just as much as we put the planet here, we put the pyramids here, which had to do with kind of like the becoming like an observer, breaking the speed of light, breaking some of the sunlight, and so on. So pyramids kind of like were partially functioning as our eyes. They were organs in a certain way, which is very, very challenging for today's people to even realize that, because humans live in very practical buildings that they only build for certain reasons, and they don't assume that these things are alive or could have functions in these ways. It's fascinating.
It's so fascinating, Tim. Thank you for all that, because it blows my mind every time I even think about this. And this is why I go to these sacred sites, is because they are alive and you feel it even in their ruined state, which means they're not operating anywhere close to what they would have been in their prime. But even still, the fact that we get these sometimes out of body experiences, these psychedelic experiences, sometimes communications, a whole variety of phenomena happen at these sacred sites. And, I've been going to these since around 2018. And each time I would have a life-changing experience, whether I was down in South Africa or in the pyramids in Egypt. They really were alive. And, I know some of the other temple complexes they built, like the Temple of Man in Luxor, is literally designed to the schematics of a human being. And each room of the temple represents different parts of the human physically and energetically. So they obviously understood architecture to a degree we're just remembering now, and because it had function. And I'm curious to get a bit more, we're touching on it already, but because it's a hot topic right now, that the discovery in the underneath the Khafre pyramid, which is the one beside the Giza pyramid, this discovery, I'll have a quick image we can share on the screen in a moment, is pretty groundbreaking, like you said. And I was wondering, have you had any more information from your insider perspective on this particular discovery, and or other pyramids that have these huge complexes built underneath the pyramid itself?
Yeah, the Grace told us that the whole plateau of the Mexican pyramids, for example, was underwater. The
Oh,
whole
wow.
the whole area was filled with water. So it just over time, which makes sense. I remember that all these cenotes and different other underground structures, there's still the connection to water. So when they told us that, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for everyone, who's into the research of the pyramids, I guess it doesn't fully come with surprise that there's something beneath the pyramid. There was like a rumor all along, but having that in the mainstream, in the normstream debate, that is fascinating. Yeah, I see the pictures. That's great.
Well, and these cylinders go very, very, very far. They're saying obviously over 2,000 feet. This several kilometers underground, and we of course don't know what the functions are yet. But I know from your perspective, Tim, like we're talking about a machine. This is definitely not a place where people were buried. This is a machine. When you look at an image like this, I mean, what kind of machine are we looking at? Is this energy production? Is this, I mean, it's probably multifaceted, right? Like most of these ancient structures were. What do you think?
Exactly. Yeah, it is multifaceted. And the most primal function of the pyramid itself was just breaking time and light into an observational geometry. So these things made life possible in a certain way. And planet Earth is not the only planet where we do find pyramids. We do find pyramids on mostly every other planet as well, where we do find life,
Hmm.
because these things have been placed there for a certain reason. Geometry in the universe makes a lot of sense because it resonates with the geometry of the universe. There is motion motion in the universe per se. And some of these geometries just tap into that. And the Giza pyramids, as you very correctly said, multifaceted uses from the primal use, again, to split up observational energy in order to make all this kind of the reality in itself at that time happening. But later on, you had human beings living at the same time as the Giza pyramids were still active, which were covered with chalk. They were covered, they had a pyramidion on top, which is basically a pole, an electromagnetic pole, and the plateau itself serves as the antipole. And so it's quite an intricate and interesting phenomenal architecture, and it can range from activation, from healing, manifestation, to just energy distribution, because we do know that the ionosphere around the planet, for example, has charged particles, and they transmission through the pyramids at all times. So there is electricity, there is energy, even more subtle ways of energies. Electricity is as we do know, just one form of energy, and energy can take various ways and various forms. Because it's just potential. So potential can go into a lot of directions. And the pyramids were clearly power plants in a certain way, not in the same way as today power outlets and so on function, which again is a little bit of the issue of where humans come in and look at the pyramids. They analyze that and compare it with what they have. And then the pyramid is usually not, it doesn't really make sense in the in the structure that people have there. But again, multifaceted, and basically creating a whole network around the planet. We also got to know that these pyramids were not randomly placed somewhere. Most of them were, at certain very clearly chosen spots around the planet where energy lines were flowing. We just got to know that there are certain hotspots around the planet where energy is, just as Australia in the summertime. You can't go anywhere without sunscreen because there's more energy available in Australia than in Greenland. But that's the same way with cosmic energies and with different other dynamics of the universe. The planet has certain hotspots, and the pyramids are strategically placed on these hotspots. And we are talking about a time way before the last shift. So we are right now in a cycle that is coming to an end right now, and making it a happy shift, which hopefully you can talk about that too. But the idea is that every 12,500 to 20,000 years, the universe just basically recycles everything and puts everything together and reuses things. We have millions and millions of people in the last iteration of this planet, as we all know, ended with a big flood,
Yeah.
biblical flood. So, right, we do have evidence of that. We do have evidence that there was a pole shift. So the pyramids were at one point a different place of the planet. That changed, that changed because the equator is now at a different place. Antarctica is now fully covered by ice. We do know in the last iteration, before the last ice age, you could walk there with your swimming trunks and have a barbecue because it was Mediterranean, and all these things happened. And then we have this Earth shift that happened 12,500 years ago, coming within, a biblical flood. And then the whole civilization just vanished. And of course, that raises questions because we do have about just norm stream science, norm stream archaeology has about 80 million houses digged out of the soil in South America alone. So we are talking about structures that had potentially 100 million hosting, the capacities of hosting 100 million of people. But we do not have, like, Normstrom archaeology has not found these bodies. People have found all these structures that are still here, but there's no evidence of any inhabitants anymore. Like, what is happening? Where did they go? There's no tools for these structures as well. A lot of times, people have not found any tools of, like, how did they build that? How did they build these structures? And we do know from the context that we had that at a certain time when this Earth shift happened, about, again, 15,000 years ago, people came in. There were extraterrestrials. There were different other, forms of life that came in and supported basically the shift. We have stories and very well documented scriptures from certain tribal nations around the planet, in Asia, famously in America, the Hopi, for example, and many other tribes. They are talking about how their people were brought into the earth in order to overcome the flood. So there were beings that were coming to them and saying, "You should better come with me because I can show you something safe." And we have these stories that are still there. We also do know from the context that some of these beings came in and said, like, "Yeah, we harvested some of your people." So the ETs have a name for that phase. They call it the big harvest because at that time they compare it to basically a plum tree or something where it's it's time to harvest the fruits. And within all this biblical, crazy, cataclysmic moment, iterations and beings of the universe coming in and basically picking and selecting beings and pulling them out of the planet, and then humanity gets sprinkled in after the last ice age, and we have the civilization the way that we have them now. It is, to me, so interesting that we have so much information about all these things in the last iteration, but since it's beyond that 20,000 year limit, there's not 100% clear what those people even were that were living on this planet. Were they 100%, human beings? Were they some type of hybrids? Was that a completely different other civilization? It's not possible to even figure that out. We do have evidence for all of that. We do find reminiscences of human genetics. We do find Neanderthalensis in Europe and other places as well. We have a variety of different other relatives to humanity that we found here, up to the point that now Mexico is dealing with these mummies that they actually analyze, that they brought in front of the Mexican parliament, and presented them, and they figured out that there's so much weird genetics going on, up to the point that one of these apparently human beings has a freaking egg in their womb. They're laying eggs. So there's a lot of stuff going on from the last iteration, where we just can't say what the reality was, because again, the universe just took different realities, pressed them together, and here we are.
Wow. Our historians are going to really have a hard time coming together with this multidimensional reality that we live in. How are we going to have our history books? We're going to have them exist in multiple timelines or something. It's going to be really, really interesting. So I love all this, Tim, and thanks again for all this incredible information. I definitely want to talk more about the shift as we come close to concluding here. But before we do, one last question about history, which we're already kind of talking about, which is, from your perspective, who were these people us, maybe versions of us, right before the last ice age ended, right before the great cataclysm that finds its way into all the tales of tribes around the world, or finds its way into the Bible and other religious scriptures. I mean, this event was massive. The fact that it echoes for 12,500 years plus after the fact, the reason that it's told through generations for thousands of years means this was a very important event. But before that event, who was living on this planet? This is where Plato, of course, talks about Atlantis and other civilizations like Lemuria. I would love to know from your perspective. Do you know who is living on this planet? Was Atlantis a real thing? What's your perspective on that?
That's a very complex and very complicated question because
Sure.
because ultimately that goes beyond this 20,000 year mark, and it and becomes quite exotic in what is actually happening. I'm going to answer your question, even though I want to point out that there is no complete answer to that anymore, because the universe has just pressed everything together to a sweet Irish stew, and that's the
Yeah.
story. But to make it very tangible for people, just to know what we're talking about, and what could be, there are probabilities. Certain things, even though certain things do not 100% go together as making sense in a linear time, because the universe doesn't always make sense. It's if we really think about, the probabilities of all this coming together and being here, then it's a pretty fantastic space. It is very psychedelic if you want to really tap into that. Humanity has this one advantage, that they've created quite a conservative, very dense type of reality, where everything seems to make sense, but it doesn't. It doesn't really make sense oftentimes. But we're dealing with certain probabilities, certain like hotspots of things where we can say we do have a lot of evidence about that. We do have, for example, eyewitnesses. We have ETs that were there. There are ETs out there that live far beyond the 20,000 year mark. So there are eyewitnesses from that time. Who could say, like, well, we observed, Earth back in the day, for which 20,000 years, for example, is nothing, which is that's remarkable too. But ultimately, we have a lot of different stories, and one of those stories, for example, that I've seen and encountered in the documents that I was looking at, was this fascinating story about humanity basically coming from a different species that is originating outside of planet Earth, looking far differently than today's human body form. And these beings were living, in the document said that very graphically and very interestingly, they were living on an aquatic planet somewhere out there. I don't really recall where it was, but not too far away. We're talking about 20 maybe light years or something like that of that measurement, right? So we do have this aquatic planet that didn't have any landmass. The document says there was like foam, but it was unstable to build anything on that. And this aquatic planet, humans were basically living underwater and building these bubbles of underwater cities. Very, very comparable to the idea of Atlantis. And when I was hearing about that, I'm personally still not. Not 100% sure if Atlantis was a real thing or not. I can't tell. I can't confirm nor deny that. But I was reminded of Atlantis when I heard, oh, there's a pre-genitor race that came before for humans, and everything they were talking about reminded me immediately of Atlantis. The way the cities were underwater, the way they lived there in certain ways, and so on. So even though it's not 100% the same story, but the document said these beings were confronted with gigantic underwater creatures on that planet, creatures that that would, eat a megalodon, which is the biggest shark, or a blue whale or something. They would eat that as a breakfast snack. That's how large these beings were. And the people at that time, who had basically, human beings, even further advanced in many, many ways. They themselves, the documents said they themselves had this idea of being very pure. They had this very proud attitude of believing that they were like some of very pure-blooded, pure-blooded race or something. So, very proud, and they had this idea that they had to leave that planet because it was basically unstable to maintain the cities, because some of these gigantic underwater creatures would just slam into the cities every now and then. So what they did, they were packing their people into these little thingies, and off they went from the planet, and then looking out in the universe where they could find a comparable habitat, which then apparently was Earth. But interesting enough, not only Earth, because don't want to spoil this here, but humanity on planet Earth is not the only Homo sapiens species in the universe. There are others.
There's more of us. There's more of us.
Yeah, there are relatives, brothers and sisters out there, mostly very, further advanced and more civilized. Let's put it that way, in a lot of ways. Which apparently they all come from the same originator species that was just roaming through the universe and looking for aquatic blue planets. And as we all know, planet Earth happened to be a blue planet. But the way they were, going into planet Earth and living here was that they were basically going into the ocean instead of, living on the lands, which they were not used to. Their immediate idea was going into the ocean, and the oceans were not filled with, it's not that dramatically dangerous in the ocean compared to where they were coming from. So apparently, some of these we might still have, working underground cities on this planet somewhere very, very deep down in the ocean, where some of these beings might or might not still inhabit the planet. And we do have a lot of records of again, tribal people and other people, which should not be dismissed. That just cannot be dismissed in a story. If there's if it's only one person, but if there's multiple people and tribes around the planet that point to the ocean and say, like, this is where the gods came in and out, that's something where we should listen to. And apparently that's the case. And then, they came to the conclusion of mixing in some of that genetics with some of the ape species, mostly bonobo apes that were on this planet, which then created the modern time human. That is one of the versions and documents that advanced projects have in their archives.
Wow. I mean, it's incredible. And it's interesting because our species does have a lot of connection to water, even though we're a land species, right? And, it sounds pretty mind blowing, but then when you think about that potential of us coming from this species that was an aquatic species, I mean, look at our skin. We don't have the skin that would make any sense from a survival perspective to be on this planet. It makes no sense. I've always thought that, okay, if we are looking at things from Darwinian evolution, specifically us, we don't make any sense. I mean, our skin, there's no reason to have the skin we have. It's not going to help us survive in any way. Why would we have that? And a lot of other questions, to be honest, about our species, these missing links, right? And that's very curious, that we would come from a planet like that. And it's also interesting that there could be very well these underground or underwater civilizations. I'm a big believer in that. To me, there's just too much space down there that we haven't explored, or at least publicly. And why not? And why not maybe this version of Atlantis, like that? Maybe it's that one that's under the water and found a way to thrive. And if you think about the surface of the planet, might be the most challenging to live on because it has the most interruptions, right? Cataclysms, things like that. So It's fascinating, Tim. And with all that in mind, let's bring it back around to what you were talking about before, which was the shift. This shift that we're moving through currently, and that we just came from talking about 12,500 years ago at the end of the last ice age. What is the shift, and what does that mean for us as the human race?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think the whole episode comes to a perfect, nice circle and a nice cycle too when we bring that up, because we were basically beginning and talking about these cycles and these movements, right, of the planet. The planet itself goes herself, whatever we want to call it, but goes through these different seasons. And since we are used to, seasons. Summertime, wintertime, and so on. There are also seasons that are, far beyond that, cosmic seasons that are due to the fact that the whole freaking solar system is moving through the galaxy as well. A lot of people might not know that. They don't know that. They might still, since Copernicus and et al., they might be aware that the planet is going around the Earth. I mean, the Earth is going around the sun, but they might not be aware that the sun is also traveling, and it pulls the whole solar system with it. And if you zoom out of that, that means that the sun circling a bigger entity, a bigger central entity in the middle of the galaxy, that brings in different weathers, if you want to call it weather, but it's different types of energy that are going into the planet, and that explains, the motion of the planet. And again, a lot of tribes, a lot of ancient texts, and so on. They all talk about that. Whoever was on this planet before, let's say it was humans, but whatever species was here before the last iteration ended, they left notes. They left marks and little letters for us, telling everyone here in the best way they could provide, friends, there will be a time when this cycle will end. Quite literally. Every single freaking ancient, holy, sacred text on the planet is speaking about exactly that. It's not just one, it's all of them. Every single one is talking about that. Everyone. And we have engraved things in the Temple of Luxor. We have basically graffitis, people that were just leaving graffitis there and hoping that the next species that would come here would actually realize and understand what was actually left there. Little did they know what actually people would look at and think, oh, interesting. But the reality is we are in that shifting time again. And last time, again, if we think about it, the soil, the magnetic shift has changed, flood happened, and so on. We had these news. We had mainstream scientists saying, "Hey, we are in the middle of like a polar shift. We're in the middle of the Earth core coming to a rotational difference." So these things are happening right in front of our eyes. The interesting thing is that the universe is a learning complex. Advanced projects would call the universe intelligent energy, which means energy is potential. The universe can take literally everything and beyond, can become part reality in the universe, because energy is just a potential that you can ride on. And then it's intelligent, which means it's self-learning, it's self-improving, it's changing. Something that I hope humanity will also raise towards is that just because something used to be something 10,000 years ago or so, doesn't mean that the universe has not improved in that time. The universe is constantly changing reality around us, sometimes so subtly that people do not, see that, but it's happening. It is happening. And we are now dealing with a more experienced, because more time has passed, a more experienced, a more intelligent form of the universe. So the experience that we have this time will be different than the experience that we had last time. So everyone who's like looking back to the last cycle and said like, "Ooh, that was dramatic." Hopefully, it's not happening that this time again. First of all sacred texts say we're not going to have another flood, which is very promising. But right. Yeah, but other than that, we also have this fantastic moment and time in the universe that we get to comprehend that each one of us is determining and creating our own reality. So while we are coming to a full circle with the end of this timeline, basically, and it's happening probably in the next few years. We are in the middle of the peak. If you ask, specialized military generals, they would tell you 2025. So it's this year, if that was the prediction of advanced programs, which does not always happen, as we know about weather phenomena. It's not always sunny just because the calendar tells you it's summer. So it can take maybe a few more years and maybe a little less. But if we are thinking about a time of like 15,000 years, that has every species has 15,000 years to prepare for this cosmic event. We're talking about maybe 2 more years, 3 more years, maybe this year, who knows? That's the last second before it's happening. And now we are finally, since 2019, the policies in the Pentagon changed, and we're now finally getting into, disclosing so many things, which is great. But ultimately, we got to come to the understanding that everyone right now watching can make a difference in this shift. Why? Because everyone is an observer of their own reality, and multiple realities form group realities, form collective realities. So the planet Earth is a collective system, a collective timeline system. And the more people come together and use their powers and be connected to the reality, and change things on this planet, the better. And to be honest, as much as I personally find that fascinating, and as much as I think life will change when we realize, oh my goodness, we are talking with a technological consciousness right now. We are soon talking with gray-skinned beings and blue-skinned beings and whatever. So as much as I find that super fascinating, this is not the main news. The main news right now is we are in the time of a shift, and something great is happening, something big is happening, and we want to make sure that it's going to be happy. So when I came forward, my main goal, 2 years ago, when I, for the first time said like, hey, I want to contribute something to this debate here on the planet. My main motivation was to tell everyone, hey, there is a chance here. There is a portal opening, a time opening, and we get to be in the driver's seat. But we got to remember our ancient powers. We got to remember our connectivity to the informational nature of the universe. We got to remember that we can steer these things. And I was giving people one thing, because I know people, it's great when we meditate for 3 hours per day. That's amazing. But just starting with 5 minutes per day is that adds up. And I gave people in that interview this idea of, hey, if you have 5 minutes and make sure that you are on the right timeline, because you and no one else can define that. You're the only one. If you can sit down on your bed and say, I'll shift happily now, and concentrate on the happiness and the shifting factor, that can change and position you on a completely new timeline, with you might not even noticing that until it's there. So that was my message. And the beautiful thing is that from that this whole All Shift Happily Now community, was created because people said, "Wow, that resonates with me, and I feel this shift. I feel something weird is happening." And having the opportunity, the hope to go into our powers and changing something in the reality realm without the typical normal stuff that humans would normally go into, like, voting harder or something like that. Uh, Without all of that, by just knowing we can tap into potentials in the quantum universe, we can learn to select. I think that made so many people hope and put them into something that they inherently always felt, that this All Shift Happening Now community grew from that, and it's becoming a growing and beautiful internet phenomenon. But it's also physical too. So there are people all around the world doing these timeline manifestations, and yeah, I'm very happy, and I want to take at least the chance to remind everyone out there. That they can do that. They don't have to use the same similar words. If they find something that resonates more with them, that's fine. I think happiness is something. It's a universal concept. I believe in that very, very much. It doesn't mean that everyone has the same definition of it, but I think we can all agree upon, that happiness is something that becomes a stabilizing factor in our timelines. So yes, if this is an opportunity to invite people into this All Shift Happily Now idea, allshifthappeningnow.com is a website. We do meditations every 25th in 2025 on YouTube, Tim Tactical. And yeah, we're meditating for these things. We have really amazing speakers, really worldwide renowned speakers that do these things with us. We have musicians and that do these things with us, and celebrities. And now we're also going into, we started the last time in Germany with a big conference, which is coming up in Mexico. We're talking about the pyramids. We are at the pyramids in December this year. We have some amazing people with us. We have some people who specialize in healing people and getting rid of the burden. We have people that Megan, for example, who's a TikToker, and she does the drowsing, for example, talking with the intelligence of the universe. You probably right. So she's joining the All Shift Happening Now team, which helps people getting into contact with the intelligence of the universe. Just experiencing that once in their lifetime is just a step forward of realizing, oh my goodness, we are surrounded by intelligence of the universe. But we have to tap into that. It's just there, we can't just leave that laying there and undiscovered. So all these things are happening, and if when that is resonating with you, whoever is watching, I would love for you to join us on this mission, or shifthappeningnow.com. I'm on Instagram, Tim Tactics, Tim Tactical on YouTube, and again, Mexico is coming up and every 25th of 2025.
Yes, and for everyone watching and listening, that's all going to be in the description below. So just check out those links for Tim's amazing work and his events that are coming up. And I need to check out this community because it's, of course, something that resonates deeply with me. And to meet more people of like-mindedness is always a beautiful thing. So I appreciate you for putting that together, Tim. And really just wanted to say thank you for all the information you shared, and just how much it's brought so much, just personally for me, like joy and perspective. And I've shifted, a lot in my perspective, just listening to you and you sharing a lot of your incredible stories and your information. So thank you so much for that. And for our show today, I just wanted to conclude with one last little thought. What has all of this for you in this journey of your life, all this information you've acquired and these incredible beings you've had contact with, when it comes to your everyday life, doesn't have to be as maybe grand or big as the things we've been talking about. When it comes to your everyday life, how do you feel like all of this has impacted you, that you find every single day stays with you and lives with you? Like, how do you find you now live your life versus before when you didn't know any of these things?
Oh, extremely, Chris. I live a very exotic life. I'm, I'm tapping. I'm quite happy. You know, the beautiful thing is that since I'm now doing this, independent field of work, that I get to design a lot of my experience myself, which is the grand learning. I'm basically teaching that to people while at the same time practicing that myself. I like when people walk the walk themselves. So I'm very happy about that and very grateful to be able to do that and to be also getting into a reality realm where I feel more at home than ever, which wasn't always the case on planet Earth. I think everyone here who's interested in that has felt that before, feeling alien on planet Earth,
For sure.
right?
Yeah, 100%.
So, right. And the beautiful thing is if we go into like comparing that to Hinduism and yoga philosophies and so on, the transition that the planet is now making is from a level 3 planet into a level 4 planet. If you compare that to what the ancient scriptures have said about that, it's basically the opening of the heart chakra. It's the opening of love, of karma, right? Kama, the Indian idea of how the cycle ends and so on. So the idea is that we are right now realizing, and in this fantastic opportunity of realizing that the universe is good, the universe is fantastically benevolent. Why? Because we are the universe. If we do select out of the space of eternity, if we select things that make us happy, the universe is happy because we are in personal union with the universe. So coming to a conclusion that the universe, even though the planet looks chaotic, and even though there might be people out there and media stations and whatever that might tell you that, something is going on somewhere all the time. Yeah, but in reality, since we do have the power of 100% selecting our own timelines and our own realities, we can create something that is so magnificent and beautiful that it reflects the actual love that the universe has for us. And one last thought, because I think everyone can relate to that, especially people that are parents themselves, fathers and mothers. If at any time you felt love for your child and felt that as an overwhelming love, know that this is just a fraction of what the universe actually feels for us. That we're tapping into something with the few ways that people can actually display this enormous love. It's only a fraction, a grain of salt in the big ocean of the love of the universe. And I think that's what deeply moved and changed my life.
Absolutely beautifully said, Tim. And I have to completely agree. When I've gone to some of these sacred sites or I've had deep meditations or psychedelic experiences in my life, and I have come into that place of pure connection and oneness with the universe, unity, as you well said, you feel that unbelievable tsunami wave of love that you didn't even know existed or was possible. Even the word love doesn't fully summarize the feeling of that. And to know that that's what we are moving into, especially because if that's what we set our minds to create the reality we want to create, this is the time to do that. So everyone watching and listening, all you need to do is just tap into your true authenticity and your true self and imagine the joy that you want to continue to live and feel into that joy on a daily basis, and we will create this reality collectively and together. So thank you so much, Tim, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. Like I said, all of Tim's information is going to be below in the description. Absolutely got to check them out. So many amazing bits of information. We just got to scratch the surface today in a long chat, but still just scratching the surface. So, Tim, I'd love to have you back on the show someday. And just thanks again. I really appreciate you coming, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much what you do for the universe too. Thank you.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for checking out this episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care now.